A dark mist began to ravage the planet, and although they didn't know exactly what was inside it, they knew that no living creature could survive in its contaminated lands, turning the world into a grim place. And so, before the mist took everything, 6 wizards fought to destroy this dark world and save what was left of the planet. They wielded their magic to confront a dragon named Boromir Napolitan, and one of them, Desir Herman, cast a spell to seal the draconian powers. In a beautiful display of teamwork, each of the wizards launched an attack, successfully defeating the dragon. Everyone celebrated their victory, and Desir thought they could finally escape that hellish existence. However, contrary to their expectations, nothing in the world turned clean, and they didn't return to their world. The 6 of them decided to wait for a while, reflecting on everything they had lost in that battle against Boromir Napolitan. After all, out of the 150 million people who faced the dragon, only they survived. Desir remembered all the companions and friends he had lost during the battle, and soon his comrades realized that only 1% of the world's wizards remained, which would undoubtedly change things for everyone. Nonetheless, the 6 decided to focus on their victory for now, as they had done a remarkable job defeating the dragon. They praised Desir in particular, stating that without him, the mission would not have been completed. After all, sealing Napolitan's draconian spells wasn't something anyone could do. They then asked why they had never heard of Desir before the mission, even though he was such a powerful wizard. The boy explained that it was because he was a commoner. Later, one of them asked what everyone would do when they returned to their world. Some of the wizards began talking about how they would like to pay tribute to the people who couldn't withstand the battle, with one saying they would visit their families to return their belongings and another wanting to build a memorial in their honor. Then another wizard mentioned that everyone's priority should be to prevent the Dark Worlds from happening again, as otherwise it would be completely wiped out. They asked a mage named Azes what she would want to do when they returned to their world, but the quiet girl remained silent. Next, they asked the same question to Desir. The boy then remembered his friend and when he lost her in the battle, along with the pain he felt. So Desir replied that he would have to decide later, as he didn't yet know what he would want to do. Suddenly, Napolitan's eye opened and his body began to shine. Everyone became frantic and puzzled because they were certain that the creature no longer had life. Then one of them recalled an ancient document he had read, which described how dragon hearts could store not only blood but also an incredible amount of mana. He went on to explain that when dragons die, the blood stops, but the stored mana has nowhere to go, meaning that the accumulated mana in Napolitan's heart would generate an explosion at any moment. They all wondered why they hadn't foreseen that something like this could happen, but they couldn't have known because it was the first time in history that humans had defeated a dragon. They tried to find a way to stop the explosion, but even Desir couldn't, as mana was a pure block of magical power. Realizing that they had no way to prevent the mana from exploding, the 6 wizards began preparing for the end of their world and their lives. Desir awaited his demise while remembering the friends he had lost and those who were still alive and would soon meet the same fate. However, after the explosion, Desir opened his eyes and realized for some inexplicable reason that he was still alive. He was utterly bewildered by what was happening when suddenly he heard applause nearby. A professor from the Hebrian Institute was welcoming the new students for the year. Upon arriving at the location, Desir recognized the professor named Bridget. She continued her speech, explaining that although some students had come from afar, unfortunately, not everyone would be able to enter the institute. They would have to take a test, where only the top 600 would be admitted. This took several students by surprise, except for Desir, who already knew what Professor Bridget was going to say. The test would be for them to clear a dark world. The students became anxious, but Bridget assured them that there was no reason to be afraid, as the Dark World was created solely for testing purposes. However, Desir knew there was a reason to fear because he had seen the future consequences of that story. Bridget explained that they would receive details from the superiors who would support them in the process, and soon they would begin the 36th 13 entrance exam. Desir had traveled back 13 years in time, right to the beginning when all the disaster started. He was shocked to realize that he had just witnessed the Hebrian Institute's entrance ceremony, even though the battle against Boromir Napolitan had begun in the year 3616. Over the next 10 years, they would fight in the dungeon where everything was destroyed, and he and the other 5 companions had failed the mission. In other words, he was about to relive the hell all over again, which left him devastated. Later, Desir realized that he knew the entire institute and realized he wasn't dreaming. Suddenly, a girl appeared, complaining that he wasn't at the designated meeting point. She was a second-year student and Desir's mentor, introducing herself as Ladoria Dorish. Desir had met her before and knew that Ladoria was a prodigious mage who used fire magic, ranking first in the Institute's list of top talents. Ladoria found it odd that Desir kept looking around, so he pretended he was just a bit nervous about the test. She told him there was no need to worry, as even though the place was called the Dark World, it was just a test for the Institute to see if they could fight. Then, Ladoria noticed on Désir's record that he was a commoner, which was not a problem for admission but placed him in the beta class regardless of how well he performed on the test. He already knew this. The Hembrian Institute had nobles in the alpha class and commoners in the beta class, discriminating against them and denying them proper education, even if they showed talent, which crushed the potential of many mages and contributed to the world's destruction. Later, Ladoria took Désir to explore the Institute. She was surprised that he didn't seem impressed with the place. He played it off, saying he had seen a similar building before, but Ladoria doubted that any facility could compare to the Institute. Désir was left speechless, but fortunately, Ladoria realized they were running late. They moved on, but on their way, they bumped into an acquaintance of Ladoria's named Elheim. Désir remembered that Elheim was a water mage and didn't get along well with Ladoria. The two began trading taunts as Elheim was upset that he had lost to Ladoria, a fire mage, and pretended he had let her win. They continued to provoke each other until Elheim noticed Désir's presence. Désir introduced himself and Elheim took a look at his record, discovering that Désir was a commoner. He laughed at Désir and Ladoria for being the commoner. He told them to wait for the test, making it clear to Désir that even if he managed to pass, he would end up in the beta class, so it would be better for him to give up and not participate in the test. This left Ladoria quite irritated, but Elheim simply ignored her and walked away. At that moment, the Institute announced a warning, informing candidates to report to the test location. Désir took a look at Ladoria, shocked to see how she was practically on fire with anger. She then told Désir that he had to pass the test no matter what, and he replied that he would do his best. And so they proceeded to the location where candidates were to gather, with Désir thinking that he knew all these people and that, if he was really in the past, he could change everyone's fate. Upon arriving at the location, he started looking for his friend among the candidates. Soon he realized that she was right behind him, wondering why he was constantly looking around. Her name was Romantica, the girl he had befriended and lost in the battle. Seeing Romantica right in front of him, alive and well, Désir made the decision to rewrite the history of that world and prevent the tragedy from happening again. The guy is so shocked that he ends up saying the girl's name. In a strangely romantic way, he wonders if they already know each other. Realizing he had said too much, Désir quickly invents that he saw her name on the screen displaying the profiles of all the new students who would be competing in the test. She then notices they're in the same group, meaning they will be taking the test together. Romantica wishes him good luck and walks away, continuing on her path. He then thinks about how she had no idea how much he missed her and how he suffered from her absence, promising himself that he won't let her go through that again. Later, Ladoria talks to Désir and informs him that he's in Group D, and his test will be a race in the Arenstein Plains at the beginner level of the Dark World. She goes on to explain that despite it being called the Dark World, it's not actually dangerous, as the Institute uses a security system that allows students to leave immediately even if they suffer fatal injuries. She begins to explain why they might receive injuries, but Elheim interrupts, explaining to Désir that the test allows the use of magic and attacks against other participants. He says that this is why it's impossible for someone like Désir to pass the test, especially considering who he will be competing against. Elheim then introduces the student he is responsible for, who is one of the participants in Group D named Azest, a magical knight. This surprises Ladoria, while Désir recognizes Azest and is delighted to see the ice magical knight again, who is also a high-level mage capable of performing an irreversible vision spell. Furthermore, she is much better with a sword than many knights, and in the future, she will be his most reliable teammate, one of the 6 mages who survived until the end, just like Désir. He notices that Azest remains as silent as ever, while Elheim provokes Ladoria by saying that being responsible for a magical knight like Azest only reflects his virtue, just as a commoner like Désir is perfect for someone of Ladoria's level. Ladoria becomes extremely irritated by his words, unlike Désir, who doesn't mind at all that Elheim mocked him for being a commoner. After all, he was just happy to see his comrade, Azest, again. Adelis then recognizes that the chances of Désir passing the test are quite low, considering that he will have to compete against a magical knight. Nevertheless, she tells him not to give up, and Désir thanks her for her support. At that moment, an announcement sounds, informing that the test for Group D is about to begin, and everyone should gather at the gate. He heads to the location and encounters Romantica and Azest once again, along with 3 other participants in their group. Désir looks at Romantica, feeling happy that she is there. Then a portal opens and everyone passes through it, ending up in the Arenstein Plains in the Dark World, which in reality has nothing dark about it. It's a lush green place with many plants and trees. An announcement states that, as it is a race, the participants' objective is to cross the finish line, which can be seen in the distance. Only the first 3 to cross it will pass the test. Furthermore, they are allowed to use magical attacks or any other methods to hinder the other participants, and anyone receiving fatal injuries will be automatically disqualified from the race. In other words, to pass the test, besides being among the first 3 across the finish line, they must also avoid any significant injuries. With the rules explained, everyone lines up at the starting line. While the race hasn't started yet, Désir wonders if Azest has also traveled back in time with memories from the future, as she was one of the survivors until the end. But since Azest is so reserved, Désir has no idea what she's thinking. Suddenly, she starts talking to him because she noticed Désir staring at her. Azest explains that she checked the list before the test, so she knew that Désir is in the lowest tier, with physical abilities well below average. Therefore, even if he continues to train, he won't have a future. With this, Désir thinks that there's really no sign that Azest remembers what they went through together in the future. Azest continues to explain that he doesn't need to worry because she has no interest in attacking the weak. Even though Azest is clearly calling him weak, Désir continues to act kindly and simply thanks her for not intending to attack him. Then the countdown for the race to begin commences, and all 6 participants prepare to run. As soon as the race starts, Azest immediately demonstrates her skills, moving extremely fast. Romantika complains about the dust Azest stirred up, and before she realizes it, all the other participants are already running. She begins to run as well, staying by Désir's side. Accidentally, she bumps into a little creature on the path eating a leaf. Romantika finds the small creature cute, and Désir comments that she still likes this kind of thing. This makes Romantika wonder how he knows something about her. Désir realizes he has spoken too much again, but unlike the last time, he can't come up with an excuse this time, so he remains silent. Romantika thinks he's trying to flirt with her and tells him to focus on the race. He agrees, stating that they should concentrate on the test, but the way things are going, they are both going to be disqualified since the other participants are far ahead of them. Romantika tells him not to compare himself to her and to stop acting like he knows her. He smiles in response, which irritates her even more. Romantika asks him to stop smiling, but he says he can't because he missed it, leaving the girl even more confused. Suddenly, Désir sees a glimmer in the distance and pushes Romantika aside just in time to prevent her from being hit by a fire magic attack. The guy called Eggs complains about Désir interfering with his attack and says that since he got involved where he wasn't supposed to, he'll be the first to be attacked. Désir then prepares to defend himself, but as soon as the guy launches his fire magic, Romantika uses her wind spell to block his attack and manages to hit Singh, eliminating him from the race. While this is happening, the other 3 participants continue to run towards the finish line. Romantika thanks Désir for saving her from the fire attack, but makes it clear they are even since she protected him from Singh's attack as well. Désir agrees, still smiling, which irritates the girl. Then he asks if she's not going to keep running, as the other 3 participants have a significant lead. Romantika says she was planning to save her trick for later, but decides to use it at that moment due to Désir's question. Romantika casts her magic called Aerovaradura, explaining to Désir that this is her true ability. Meanwhile, the Institute's staff are watching the tests of all the new students. The groups A and C had just finished the test, while the groups D and F were still in the process of completing it. Everyone was commenting on how talented the candidates that year were, saying that in Group D, there was even a magical knight, a shining example of an ability. This reminded them that in the same group, there was a commoner, seeing Désir as an unlucky soul to be in the same group as the magical knight. While everyone laughed at Désir, Professor Bridget remained silent. Back to the race, one of the participants, who was right behind Azes, noticed how fast she was. However, he realized that if he kept up that pace, he would pass the test. But right at that moment, a massive gust of wind started, causing the participant behind him to be blown away. Immediately, the guy used his sword to anchor himself to the ground, thinking that a gust like that wouldn't be enough to bring him down. However, he noticed that Azes continued to run, using her sword to cut through the wind rather than getting stuck on the ground as he did. Impressed, he decided to follow the magical knight's example, but suddenly, a tree started to uproot due to the strong wind. Unluckily, it flew right in his direction, falling on top of him and the other participant, causing both to be eliminated due to fatal injuries. After eliminating 2 from the race, Romantika stopped using her wind magic, ending the tempest while lamenting not being able to eliminate all 3, with Azes still in the race. Now, besides the magical knight, only she and Désir remained, meaning the 3 of them could pass the test. However, Romantika stated that wasn't her intention, as Désir was her next target. She tried to convince Désir to give up, so she wouldn't have to attack him, becoming increasingly frustrated that the guy wouldn't wipe the smile off his face, even when threatened. Since, despite her warnings, Désir refused to surrender, she launched several attack points, saying it would hurt so much he'd think he wouldn't survive. However, they had been informed that it was impossible not to survive in that place, so he could relax. Next, Romantika unleashed her magic, a spell called the Blinding Strike, causing a massive attack to fall right where Désir was. She then continued her race confidently, thinking she had defeated him. But Désir was perfectly fine, despite admitting he was impressed by how she could launch multiple attacks at once. Romantika couldn't understand how he had escaped her attacks, while Désir calmly explained that despite her being very strong, she prioritized speed, making her control weak. A slight adjustment in trajectory was enough to dodge her attacks. Romantika took this as an insult and got angry. She prepared to launch her attack again, saying she wouldn't miss this time. She cast a spell called Poisonous Wind, but Désir said that just like before, it was easy to alter the air currents slightly to avoid being hit. He then destroyed her attack, making her realize that Désir could use the inversion spell, something only high-level circle mages could do. She questioned how he had this ability, given he was in the lowest circle. She launched the same attack again, but Désir used his inversion spell to nullify her magic once more. She then recognized that his abilities far surpassed hers. Romantika began to retreat out of fear of Désir, but she decided to make one last attempt, creating dozens of attack points, challenging Désir to invert so many attacks at once. However, he managed to protect himself from all of them, recognizing that while Romantika was an excellent mage, undoubtedly one of the best among the new students that year, he knew that at her level, the things that would happen in the future would only repeat. So to make her strive to become even stronger, Désir not only destroyed her attacks but also their focal points, leaving the girl completely defeated. He then said that he could do more than just invert spells, preparing to launch an attack that Romantika recognized as one of the basic spells. Désir explained that he wasn't fighting her, and that the test wasn't about a magic duel, but about who could reach the finish line. In other words, he was going to hit himself with his magic. He prepared to launch a fire spell, and Romantika thought he was crazy for doing so, as even if they couldn't die there, they could still get injured. However, he cast his fireball nonetheless, sending himself flying into the air. Azez continued running, determined to cross the finish line, when suddenly Désir appeared out of nowhere, getting closer to her. Realizing that he would soon catch up, Azez decided to fight. She didn't know how Désir had faced someone of Romantika's caliber, but she had already noticed he wasn't as weak as she thought. So Azez decided to attack with everything she had, casting a spell called Talon's Magic Arrows. But Désir immediately used his inversion spell, canceling all of the attacks. Azez realized what Désir was doing and decided to end it before he took all of her attacks. She launched several Talon's magic arrows in his direction, but Désir managed to swiftly change his defense point, surviving all the blows. Azez then decided to change tactics. She grouped all the attack points into one to avoid giving Désir time to invert the spells, determined to crush him with everything. Désir acknowledged that it was a good decision, but not only did he change the attack's trajectory, he also used it to create an explosion, gaining momentum. With this, Désir managed to surpass Azez, saying it only happened because she was too obsessed with defeating him. And so Désir quickly crossed the finish line, becoming the first participant to qualify for the test. Shortly after, Azez also qualified, while Romantika ran frantically to pass as well. Désir then thought that the three of them had to become even stronger to prevent the impending tragedy he knew was coming. Meanwhile, in Group F, a guy named Donetta Haddon defeated the other three remaining participants, being the only student to pass the test in that group.